Welcome to the Blue Waters webinar. I'm Scott Lathrop with the Blue Waters Project at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois. We welcome you to today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Dan Katz, who's Assistant Director for Scientific Software and Applications at NCSA and a Research Associate Professor in Computer Science, Electrical Computing and Engineering, as well as the iSchool here at the University of Illinois. It's my pleasure then to have Dan talk about 3 research software sustainability activities. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Dan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott, and everybody else who's watching. I'm going to talk, as Scott said, about 3 different activities. The context of this really is that there are a number of different challenges related to software sustainability, and there are different groups that are trying to address some of those different challenges, sometimes overlapping, sometimes looking at particular aspects. And these 3 particular groups have some overlaps, and I'll try to talk about that as I go through. So first, just to say what research software sustainability really means. The definitions that have been used in the WSSSPE context, and I'll explain WSSSPE in a moment, is that sustainable software is software that has the capacity to endure, so that it will continue to be available in the future on new platforms and meeting new needs. And so we have a research software lifecycle that then includes a number of steps. First, acquiring and assembling the resources, including the funding and people, and building them into teams and communities. Second, actually developing software. Third, using software. Fourth, recognizing contributions to software and of the software itself. And fifth, then maintaining the software. And this is a cycle that needs to continue in order for the software to continue to be sustainable. The context of WSSSPE, again, which I will define in a moment, is that we have had a remarkable amount of progress in scientific research over the last really 50, 100 years. But more recently, it's become dependent on the quality and accessibility of software itself at a variety of different levels. And that makes it critical to address a lot of new challenges related to the development, deployment, and maintenance of reusable software. It's also very important that scientists and researchers and students are able to learn and adopt a new set of software-related skills and methodologies. We have established researchers who already have some of these skills and are acquiring others. And in particular, there's a specialized class of software developers that's emerging in academic environments. And these developers are an integral and embedded part of successful research teams. So WSSSPE is intended to be a forum to discuss some of the challenges, including the positions and experiences, as well as a forum for the community to assemble and act. WSSSPE is an international community-driven organization that promotes sustainable research software by addressing the challenges related to the full life cycle of research software through shared learning and community action. And the intent of WSSSPE is to try to get to a future world where research software is accessible, robust, sustained, and recognized as a scholarly research product that's critical to the advancement of knowledge, learning, and discovery. We do that in WSSSPE by promoting a number of areas, by positively impacting 4 areas in particular. Principles and best practices, which are intended to develop and then promote best practices in sustainable software. Careers, which is intended to develop and support career paths in research software development and engineering, particularly in academic environments. Learning, and engaging in activities that promote peer learning and interaction. And credit, which is ensuring that the recognition of research software as an intellectual contribution is there, equal to the contribution made in other research products. If we think about the role of different organizations, and I apologize, this is something that I've drawn recently, and it is not a very professional drawing yet. It's still a little bit in an exploration stage, and once it settles down, I think we'll probably create a better version. But this is, I think, useful at this point to think about how some of these different pieces fit together. So I would say that, let's see, I have a cursor? Yes, okay. So we have kind of a central axis of sustainable software that really includes people and software itself, and involves the software engineering processes and practices in the middle. And this is important because the people really, right, people are who develop the software. They're the ones that are hired by organizations, they're the ones that are funded, they're the ones that join communities, and they're the ones that do the actions of publishing software. And then the software itself obviously is central because it's the thing that actually enables the science and engineering work to be done. It's in some sense, the core of a number of different research products. So I don't really want to spend a huge amount of time going through all of the details of this, but I just wanted to lay this out to kind of say that there's these different, let's say, kind of nouns in some sense that we have, these different things, funding organizations, hiring organizations, people, communities, software itself, publishers, hardware and underlying software, and software engineering processes, and then we have a set of actions. And the different things can act on other things. And I've, again, tried to explain here and define some of the ways in which those happen. And by thinking about things in this way, we can try to think about how different activities that WSSPE or other groups are doing work, and we can try to see how much of the space these cover and what parts of the space are left out that we then need to go back and worry about later. So WSSPE itself, I've said I was going to define it a few times, so let me go ahead and do that now. Originally, WSSPE stood for the Workshop on Sustainable Software for Science, Practice, and Experience. And that was great when we had one workshop and we were only running one workshop. But after that workshop, when we decided to continue, we needed to turn that acronym into something that was going to be a continuing organization. And so that became Working Towards Sustainable Software for Science, Practice, and Experience. And we picked WSSPE for a couple of reasons. One is that it's kind of an acronym that you can say. It's not exactly spelled like it sounds, but if you see it, you can pronounce it. And second, because it's unique in Google. And so if you look up WSSPE, you'll find us, and you won't get confused as in other things. One of the potential, problems with this is that we liked the sound and the S's. And so we put three of them together, and we used the last S for science. And we probably, in retrospect, should have called it research, because the things we're doing are not really specific to science. They're really specific to research software in general, whether it's in engineering or in the humanities or really anywhere else. We have a website, which is wspe.researchcomputing.org.uk. On that website, you can find how to join our mailing list and how to send mail to the community. We have a Slack channel. You can also join the Slack channel from the website. We have a Twitter account, which is just WSSPE, and a Facebook account, which is also WSSPE. And so we try to use those to communicate both in terms of announcements of things going on, in terms of questions about people that want to get together to do things, but also members of the community can use those to talk about anything that they want that falls into this category. So the channels, I guess I would say in general, the mailing list is somewhat more announcement based, and then the Slack and Twitter channels are more discussion oriented, and Facebook again is a little bit more announcement oriented. So WSSPE really is a community in a lot of ways. It's a set of people. It's also a set of meetings, and to some extent is a set of activities. Okay, so in terms of the meetings, WSSPE had two original one-day workshops that were at SC13 and SC14. These were really good for forming the WSSPE community and for letting people have the opportunity to do presentations, but they weren't actually very good for discussions or continuing activities. In particular, all the chairs were locked in rows, and we couldn't really move them into circles or anything like that. And just the structure of adding yourself onto any conference means that you're going to do what that conference is set up to do. And so we also then tried to do things that were less formal. So we had some meetings that were called WSSPE 1.1 and 2.1 that were half-day workshops at SciPy 2014 and 2015 that were much more informal. They focused on presentations and lessons from SciPy projects, but they also had a fair bit of discussion because that's really how SciPy works as a conference. And then based on those two things, then we had a meeting called WSSPE 3 in 2015 where we got together, had our own space, could do everything we wanted, and had a 1.5-day workshop in Boulder, plus an extra half day for report writing after that for people that wanted to stay around and participate in that. It was some presentations, but a lot of groups that formed around activities, and most of the time was spent in forming those groups and having those groups actually talk about what they wanted to do. We had 10 that formed. 9 of them were still there at the end of the 1.5 days. And all of those groups created plans of how their activities could continue. After about a year, we looked back, excuse me, and about a third of the groups were still active and working together or with others. About a third had made some progress, and about a third were actually stalled and were waiting for somebody who had enough time to become a leader and for that group to really emerge and to start taking shape. Based on that result in WSSPE 3, we then had a much longer workshop, a 2.5-day workshop called WSSPE 4 that was in Manchester in the UK in coordination with the first Research Software Engineer Conference that was also there. And that workshop developed the mission and vision that I presented previously, and also based on the experiences we had, we divided things up into 2 tracks to some extent. We had a first track that was intended to build a sustainable future for open use research software, to really talk about what the future should look like, think about how we would get there, not focus on where we were, but really focus on the future. And we had a second track that was much more focused on the present, that was looking at what are people doing today and how can we improve that today. The goal of WSSPE 4 overall was to continue the working groups that we had in WSSPE 3, bring in new participants who hadn't been involved, and start some new groups if that made sense. And so during WSSPE 4, the working groups met. Again, they defined specific plans to make progress, to get feedback from the larger community, and to start work. And our goal was that after WSSPE 4, those working groups would continue to meet and to make progress. The WSSPE 4 working groups in particular, I'm listing here. I guess I'm not going to read this to you, but basically you can see that we're looking at things like best practices, how different groups in different countries could align, what kind of infrastructure is needed for sustainable software to really be developed, what kind of metadata is needed for software to be published and for people to get credit for it, how do we actually develop sustainable software, and what do we know and what are the best practices, what's the role of social science in scientific software and can we improve that, what kind of metrics are there that make sense for sustainable software, how do we coordinate access to the underlying continuous integration services, thanks Scott, that are needed for research software, what software engineering processes work and don't work for research software versus for business software or for other things, how do we really index the software that we have, and when we have computational scientists that are building software, what kinds of practices should we have in their letters of evaluation, in particular if they're in a promotion or tenure case? If I lay out all of these different organizations on top of that schematic we had, you can see that we're really covering the entire space. This is messy. Again, this is in progress. At some point, we'll have a more professional version, probably with better colors that actually don't clash. But here we are today. So I think the main point that I wanted to make with this is that these different groups, which we didn't think about at all in terms of how they overlapped, actually cover the entire space that we've considered. There are areas like people where probably 7 of the groups actually have a focus. There are other areas like software where, again, probably, 6 or 7 groups have a focus, but there are other things that are a little bit off on the edge. And so we're really still working on this and trying to think about how do these different groups interact, what are the activities we're missing, and things like that. So the things that didn't work at WSSPE 4 are that we use these ideas to create and form working groups, which is great. And we intended those groups to start at the workshop and then to continue afterwards. And this really reinforced a lesson from WSSPE 3 that I don't think we took to heart as much after WSSPE 3, which is that it's relatively easy to get motivated people to come to a meeting and to spend time at that meeting productively working and planning future work, but it's really hard to get that additional work to take place after the meeting. The main problem seems to be time. So when people commit to spending time at a workshop, they put their energy into being there at that workshop often, and so they do things productively. But they haven't really committed at the time to doing anything more than this. So when somebody goes to a workshop, they're not making a commitment about what they're going to do after the workshop, and we need to get them to do that during the workshop, and we have not been as successful as I would like in that. In general, the energy and the effort of people trail off after the workshop as other commitments come back to the fore. And so, without resolving this issue, having further multi-day workshops focused on new activities is a little bit unclear. The thing that did work is that we really created a gathering place for people to come together and discuss scientific software sustainability. This was a great meeting place for groups that were already in place or composed of related funded activities. And so future WSSPE meetings are probably going to combine these functions, and they'll be intended to be a meeting place, a place to share experiences and lessons learned, and a place for existing groups and related projects to meet in person where they already are trying to do things, but they need to come together to do things in person from time to time. Other parts of the WSSPE infrastructure, like the email list and the Slack channel, will continue to be used for general discussions and potentially for new groups to talk about forming. But I don't know that we're necessarily going to want to have a future meeting where we have new groups forming as an outcome. It's not clear that works so well. So after WSSPE 4, last year we had two meetings. We had WSSPE 5.1 and WSSPE 5.2. And I guess I should say that these numbering scheme might be a little unclear, so I'll just say briefly, the intent of the numbering scheme is that a major number, WSSPE 1 through WSSPE 4, is a major meeting, and a minor number is a smaller meeting, a one-day meeting. And so there was no WSSPE 5 because we didn't really have a large get-together in 2017. I think we will in 2016, which I'll talk about in a minute. 2018, which I'll talk about in a minute. But so WSSPE, in last year, we had two one-day workshops, one that was with the second URSSI conference, again in Manchester in the UK. It was kind of half short talks and half speed blogging. And if you haven't been involved in speed blogging, I encourage you to look it up and to try to find some activity where it happens. It's a great experience, I think. It's a way of talking for a short period of time, maybe half an hour to an hour, and then spending another half hour to an hour actually writing. And at the end of the process, you usually have 80 to 90% of a blog written down. And there's a little bit of editing and a little bit more work that happens afterwards, but it's I found it to be a great way of documenting an activity, documenting a place. So we had 8 different speed blogs that came out of that. The Research Software Project Manager, looking for software use and research, towards reproducibility in research software, overcoming barriers to adopting software best practices in research, why research software engineers should have permanent contracts, a standard formation for citation files, encouraging good software development practice in research teams, and overcoming entry barriers to motivate better practices in research software engineering. I'll talk about this a little bit on the next slide, a little bit more, but I'll also mention that we also had a WSSPE 5.2 meeting last year that was a one-day workshop, sorry for the typo, should be workshop, at eScience 2017 that was in Auckland, New Zealand, and that really focused on presentations in half and community building in New Zealand and Australia because we had not had any event in that space before, in that physical place. So again, since I have the schematic, I wanted to keep using it. And in this case, I tried to map the speed blogs onto it. And once again, we had not thought of the schematic when we did the speed blogs. We found we did this in terms of people proposing ideas of things that they wanted to talk about, and then other people joining those activities. And so we ended up with these 8 groups, again, without thinking about how they covered the space. And we ended up having, I would say, most activities really focused on this people and software access. And then a few of them focus more on the credit piece about how software and publishing and repositories and index work together. And we didn't really talk about portability and how underlying hardware and software are used. We didn't really talk about the role of funding organizations and actually project funding at all, which was kind of interesting to look at in hindsight. Okay, so this year we're talking about 2 meetings. I don't know if either of these will happen, but I think they likely will. My guess is that there likely will be a WSSPE 6 meeting. That'll be a one-day workshop that'll go with an URSSI meeting, and I'll talk about URSSI as the third activity a little bit later. And then I think we also will propose a one-day workshop that'll likely be WSSPE 6.1 that'll be with eScience 2018, which is going to be in Amsterdam. Likely URSSI 6 will be in the September timeframe. I believe eScience is going to be in October, so these will both likely be in the fall, with the idea that people in the U.S. and people around the world that want to come for the larger, more general meeting can, and people that are already going to eScience or in Europe that are interested in getting involved can come to the workshop that will be with eScience 2018, assuming that it's accepted. It'll be a peer review process. And so I think the answer, if you're interested, is basically stay tuned, look at the website, join the Slack channel, join the mailing list, and we will keep you up to date as things happen. And if you're interested in joining the organizing committee or participating in the organizing of one of these or a future activity, let us know. Again, use the mailing list to do that. Contact me, whatever seems right. Okay, so that's the state of WSSPE. The second thing that I want to talk about is the Better Scientific Software activity, which has the abbreviation BSSW with a W in lowercase. This is something that's led by Mike Carew and Lois McInnes in the DOE, Mike at Sandia and Lois at Argonne. And the idea of better scientific software is what's needed so that the code that people are writing today will be sustainable. And so you can see again that there's a fair amount of overlap with this and WSSPE. The thing that the BSSW community is trying to do is really to build a repository and a place in which data is available, data being a number of different things. Better Scientific Software has the statement that scientific software has emerged as essential because the models and architectures and projects have been complex. The computational science and engineering community now has an opportunity and a mandate to address a number of these challenges in productivity, quality, and sustainability. BSSW has a website, which you can see is just bssw.io. It's, as I said before, intended to be a collaborative content site, with that content being developed on general topics. There's an extra topics related to developer productivity and software sustainability, primarily in computational science and engineering. And this is a site that is intended to be open to contributions from the community and is extremely welcoming to contributions from the community. It's really, again, a hub for sharing information on practices, techniques, experiences, and tools. The goals are to raise the awareness of the importance of good software practices, to add to the quality and reliability of computationally based scientific results, and to raise the awareness of the challenges that are being faced by software developers, particularly in the area of HPC and HEC high-end computing, as those get to be larger and larger. The people that are using the site then hopefully will use it to find information on particular topics, or they may propose to curate or create new content based on their own experience. And the back end is using GitHub, and so people can put in pull requests to create content that they want to share, or there's a comment mechanism to suggest new topics and people that might create those topics. The different kinds of topics that are in here are things related to performance, particularly, again, HPC, things at leadership class facilities like some of the DOE laboratories and Blue Waters, skills, collaboration, how people work together, how teams work together, reliability, including testing and continuous integration and reproducibility, development, which has a lot of different pieces, and then planning. This is really intended, again, to span a really broad range of topics. And the BSSW folks, if they were speaking here instead of me, would say very strongly that they need your input. And they've made this little sticker. It's the actual size as the outline, but the sticker looks like the bigger version. And so you may start to see people with these stickers on their laptops or on other things. And if you're interested in the sticker and you're at an event with any of the BSSW people, I'm very sure that they will have extra stickers to give out. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about then is something that is really newer and is really just starting. WSSPE has been around for 5 to 6 years. BSSW has started and is, in some sense, a few months old, but has been planned for a while. and URSSI, an activity to conceptualize a U.S. Research Software Sustainability Institute, was funded in December, and we're really just starting now. The folks that are involved in this are Karthik Ram at Berkeley, Jeff Carver at Alabama, Sandra Giesing at Notre Dame, myself here at Illinois, and Nick Weber at Washington. We have a fairly large team, and I don't necessarily want to read again everybody that's on the team, but I just want to put this up because we've tried to include people from a variety of different disciplines, a variety of different funding sources, a variety of different universities. And we have an advisory committee then that also includes people from industry, people internationally, people that are leading other software sustainability institutes. And I guess maybe the other thing that I should say is that we also have a reasonably strong focus on people and sociology, in particular through Nick, through James Howison on the advisory committee, and through a few of the other senior personnel. So we are basically working in the same space in some sense as WSSPE and BSSW. We have the idea, again, that we're starting with, that modern research is increasingly digital, that we have data and publications that are being created and analyzed and stored electronically using tools and methods that are expressed in software. Most of the software is developed specifically for research, and it's developed by the researchers. And again, we would say that research software is essential to progress in almost all research fields, but it's often not developed in an efficient or sustainable way. And we often have knowledge that's locked away in individual laboratories or shared via methods papers that can't directly be used by other people. And we have researchers who really know their disciplines really well, but they often don't have the training and understanding of the best practices in software that could help them ease development and maintainability, and could then encourage sustainability and reproducibility of their work and of the software itself. And then we finally have the point, which is that the developing community doesn't match the diversity of the overall society or of the overall user communities. And so we're really trying to address a number of these different issues in this project. In particular, the things that we want to do are to conceptualize, which really means to plan, a U.S. Research Sustainability, Software Sustainability Institute. We have funding now to do this planning, but we are not the institute. We're trying to figure out what the institute should be and to plan that, and hopefully to have an opportunity then to convince NSF that this is a good thing, and then to propose such an institute later. We want to go beyond existing resources like GitHub. Right? There's a lot of resources that exist, but we don't think that any of those resources alone really do the job that's needed. We want to cut across a number of existing activities funded by NSF and beyond. So NSF funds a lot of software development, DOE, NIH, a number of different groups do this. But in some ways, these are not coordinated across agencies, and often they're not coordinated across projects. We want to directly and indirectly impact really all software development and maintenance across all of NSF, because we're working under NSF funding, but not just across NSF. And we're focusing on the entire research software ecosystem, including the people who create, maintain, and use research software. If everything goes as ideally, we would end up with an eager and supportive and inclusive community that stands behind this idea. We would have a concrete institute plan that's configured to offer a bunch of services that actually make all of these things happen. And we would have a published survey and data that demonstrates that this is something that's important to the community. The activities that we're planning within URSSI are a set of workshops. Currently, we're planning 5 of them. The first one is going to be a very general, much larger discussion to try to really gather the community and to gather a bunch of different ideas. This will be in Berkeley from April 10th through 12th. We then are, again, currently planning 3 topical workshops that would focus on particular ideas or particular subsets that come out of that initial workshop and the survey that we're planning. And then a final wrap-up workshop that would be really aimed at finalizing a plan and really bringing everything together and creating the outputs that we need. The survey that I've mentioned before is intended to be widely distributed to engage a variety of stakeholder communities. And again, stakeholder communities here include developers, funders, hiring organizations, libraries and repositories, professional societies, users, maintainers, and really everybody that is involved in software in one way or another. We are hoping that we can learn about the software then that is produced and used by these stakeholders and the ways that they contemplate sustaining it. Our intent is that this survey we'll get the results of the survey before the topical workshops, but likely after the general workshop. And so this will feed into what those topical workshops are, as well as the plans and outputs. We also plan some ethnographic studies. So we plan to take 3 to 5 specific software projects and to recruit them and to have most likely Nick and maybe some people working with him actually sit with those projects and really try to understand what they're doing and go into detail about what's working and what's not working for them. And in particular to learn about specific sustainability practices and project governance in action in those projects by really embedding ourselves into those projects. We're going to be communicating through newsletters, through a website, which is URSSI.us. If you go to that today, you'll find that it has almost no information on it other than to join a mailing list. But in the next couple of weeks, we'll really be expanding that. And also through social media. So there again is there's an URSSI Twitter account. There will be a variety of other things that we'll do in that area. Our goal is to iteratively build on what we know of already, the challenges for sustainable software and its developers, but to bring in new things that the set of us that wrote this proposal don't know by going to the larger community through these workshops, through the survey, through the ethnographic studies. We're thinking about 3 different areas of concern. We've divided up the things that we're thinking into these 3 areas. First, the functioning of the individual and the team. Second, the functioning of the research software. And third, the functioning of the research field itself. In terms of the individual and the team, these are places where training and education come in, how we give credit for software development, how we enable publication pathways for software itself, how we create satisfactory and rewarding career paths for the people that are involved in this process, and how we increase the participation of underrepresented groups in the software engineering process and really in the entire process. For the research software itself, we want to make the software more sustainable. We want to grow community, evolve governance, and develop relationships between different organizations, both academic and industrial, and I guess I should actually say in national labs here as well, to foster both testing and reproducibility and to make those more common and easier, to support new models and developments, things like Agile Web Framework, software as a service, other things, and to really understand how to best include the contributions of transient contributors, in particular students in academia. And then finally, the third of these options is functioning of the research field itself. So questions like how do we grow communities around research software and the fact that different users have very different requirements. How do we catalog the software that's there and what's needed and highlight those gaps so that people want to come and fill them? How do we disseminate new developments that happen in the field? How do we train researchers in the usage of the software? And how do we understand and improve the pipelines of ideally increasingly diverse developers and maintainers? If you're interested in getting more involved with URSSI, again, you can watch the webpage, you can join the mailing list. The webpage, again, will, in the next few weeks, should become vastly more expanded, and the mailing list is on the webpage. You can follow us on Twitter. You can take the survey when it's released, and we'll be distributing that through the webpage, through Twitter, and through a variety of different email channels, including hopefully to Blue Waters users and through the channels that were used to advertise this webinar. And if you have questions or want to suggest something or want to volunteer, you can email us, and we have contact at URSSI.us as the general email to suggest things. So that's really the 3 things that I wanted to talk about. I think, as you've hopefully seen, these activities are related to each other. They're in different stages of maturity. For them to be successful, they're all going to need to interact, and they will also need to interact with a bunch of other activities that I haven't talked about that are going on in other communities and other countries and in discipline-specific areas. And really, those are the goals that we have. And in some sense, the thing that probably is most important here is the people and the communities that we form, and how those communities then impact the software that we have and that we will have, and the overall field of software. And so with that, I would say thank you for listening and paying attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And I guess that would be through the Slack team channel or through I guess, a YouTube mechanism for people that are watching on YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So yes, if you have questions, feel free to post them on the YouTube live chat or through Slack. In the meantime, I'll ask Dan a question or two. You talked about training and education. Can you talk about any impact that you've seen or processes that are underway to affect the educational process? Bring some of this into the curriculum?
Yeah, so I think there's probably kind of actually a bunch of different answers to that. And I think training is actually the easier one to talk about, so I'll just first say that activities like software carpentry and data carpentry and other carpentries that are being proposed and developed, such as HPC carpentry, and potentially a sustainable software carpentry and a lab carpentry, and all of these things are really a great way to get people to come together and develop content that can be used either in training or in education. I was actually reasonably surprised to realize that the equivalent of, let's say, 4 carpentry courses that are over 2 days is a semester of lecturing. And so you can think of these courses really as being roughly a quarter of a semester of these training activities as being roughly a quarter of a semester of a course. And so providing this content and breaking it up into chunks in which those can be inserted into existing courses, I think, is one of the things that has happened, and that a number of faculty members at different places are really starting to bring in. There also are new courses being developed. I guess one in particular that I think is really interesting and is worth highlighting is the data science curriculum that's being developed at Berkeley. I think there's something like 2,000 students that took the introductory course in the fall, and that's been growing rapidly. And the model that they have, which I think is really interesting, is that there's this single new course that is taught, and then there's a bunch of different discipline-specific courses that either are new or bring in material that is based on students having learned this general knowledge as they go on. And so I think the answer in education really is going to be a combination of these two things. It's going to be some new courses that probably have to be brought in, but it's going to be reworking a number of existing courses to bring in data science, to bring in software, to bring in computational science to some extent as well.
Terrific, thank you. One other question. So you've talked about 3 strategies, and it's clear that there's some complementary aspects across all 3 and also some people involved in all 3. Can you talk about how these 3 activities coordinate and share information?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that right now is mostly through the fact that we have a lot of people that are really the same people involved in them. The overall sets of people are very different, but there are a number of common people. So as an example of this, for the better scientific software activity, Mike, who is one of the 2 PIs of that, is one of the senior personnel in the URSSI activity, and he's been also involved in some of the WSSSPE activities. The URSSI co-PIs have been involved in WSSSPE and go back and forth. There are people like Nancy Wilkins-Deere and Daniel Crawford that are leading existing institutes for science gateways and for molecular sciences, and they also have been involved in WSSPE activities in the past, and they are on the advisory committee of the URSSI activity. So most of this really is by making sure that there are a set of kind of key people that are playing that role to transfer information between these different groups. As I mentioned, the WSSPE 6 meeting will likely be co-located immediately following or immediately before one of the URSSI meetings. And so again, that's a way of trying to get people to come to both activities. I will say that there's 2 other groups that I didn't really talk about that I should just mention. Well, I talked about one of them briefly, but I should mention the other one very strongly, which is the Software Sustainability Institute in the UK that's led by Neil Chu Hong. Neil has been very heavily involved in WSSPE. He's also on the, I believe he's one of the senior personnel in URSSI. He could be on the advisory committee. I'd have to go back and look for the second, but he's been involved in that as well. And so the core people in that activity have overlap with all these other activities as well. So I think, and then the other thing that I did mention briefly is the RSE work. So the research software engineer activities. That's something that started in the UK. There are roughly, I think, 700 or 800 people that are on their mailing list, people who consider themselves research software engineers. And by that, these are generally people who have IT professional skills, but are also extremely familiar with research and are embedded in research and understand how research works. And so they really kind of provide this link between software engineering practices and software disciplines and research. And again, we've tried to organize meetings alongside RSE meetings. We have, under WSSSPE, activities that have been focused on RSEs. RSEs came out of the SSI group initially. And these RSEs, again, are a large community of people that interact in all these different activities. And we actually have just started an RSE group in the US as well. There was a survey that we did in December, and we had about 300 US people respond to that survey. And so we're just kind of spinning up some websites and some activities in the US. And I expect that those also will overlap strongly with WSSSPE, with BSSW, and with URSSI.
I was wondering, what are some of the ways that this drive for sustainability is impacting the processes and the nature of research itself? Is it being driven back towards researchers, or are we sort of just responding to what they need?
Right. So I think it's interesting. I could kind of tell a whole story about how researchers are the central part and the most important stakeholder in this process. But then I could tell a very similar story about a number of other communities, like the software itself, like the software developers, like the funders. And so I think it's a little bit hard to really say that any one of these things are the most important thing, but I certainly would say that the thing that is driving us is the fact that it is really the role of software in research and the role of software in the researcher's work. In many cases, the researchers are also the developers. In some cases, the developers are not the researchers. There are other people that have come in to help, like the RSEs. The researchers themselves rarely develop all the software that they use. They often are reliant on software that's been developed in other places for other purposes, or community codes where multiple groups of researchers are contributing to something together. So I guess I would say that really all of these things have researchers as one of the groups of stakeholders that are of primary concern. But I also feel like I could say that all the stakeholders are of primary concern, which means that in some sense we don't really. Primary is probably not the right word to use here. We probably have a set of interlocking stakeholders, interlocking activities, interlocking groups, and for these all to work, they really all need to work.
Okay, with that then, we'll ask you all to join me in thanking Dan for a tremendous presentation today. Coming up, you will receive notification when the final edited recording of this session is posted, so you can view that. Our next upcoming webinar is February 28th, and that'll be by Matt Turk from NCSA on analysis and visualization with YT. With that, then, we'll conclude today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar. Thank you.